The claiming market was where the unwanted were sold, and as Sonara stood among the discarded women on the auction platform, she kept her head bowed, her hood pulled low, praying the shadows would swallow her whole. Because unlike the others who preened and posed, desperate to catch a buyer's eye, Sonara needed to remain invisible. The scar made that impossible. She could feel their stares burning through the fabric. The whispers slithered through the crowd like venom. "What's she hiding?" they hissed. "Must be monstrous, diseased, cursed." They weren't entirely wrong. If no one claimed her tonight, her father could legally sell her into slavery. That had always been his plan. A final punishment for the daughter he blamed for everything. Then the doors exploded open. The Alpha King of Valdorn walked into the hall like winter given flesh, beautiful and brutal and utterly out of place. He passed noblewomen and princesses without a glance. He ignored the desperate pleas of the other women on the platform. He stopped directly in front of Sonara. And before she could react, before she could run or beg or explain, his fingers closed around the edge of her hood and pulled it back. The crowd gasped. Her scar was exposed for all to see, the raised and puckered flesh that marked her as dangerous, as criminal, as bound. The king studied her ruined face for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll take this one." He would marry her, protect her, never look upon her with disgust. But he made one condition absolutely clear. He would never love her. Neither of them understood how impossible that vow would become. The women had been arranged like cattle at market. Sonara stood at the far end of the platform, pressed into the shadows as much as the torchlight would allow. The claiming market of Valdorn was held in the great hall of Thornwick Castle every autumn, when unmated wolves with nowhere else to go came to be sold to the highest bidder. Not sold, she reminded herself bitterly. Claimed, as if the word made it any less degrading. The men who attended these markets weren't looking for love. They wanted servants, bed warmers, brood mares for heirs they'd never acknowledge. And the women who ended up here had no choice but to accept whatever scraps were offered. Sonara had always known she'd end up here eventually. The auctioneer droned through his list, his voice flat with boredom. Mira Callan, 23 winters, trained in household management, previously betrothed twice. The woman beside Sonara wept silently, her tears cutting tracks through carefully applied powder. She'd been beautiful once. Time and misfortune had brought her to this platform. Another woman stood rigid, her chin raised despite the scar that carved her face from temple to jaw. Battle wound, perhaps, or an angry former mate. And then there was Sonara, hidden beneath her hood, her hands trembling inside her sleeves. She could feel her father watching from the edge of the crowd. Lord Aldrich Vance hadn't acknowledged her, of course. He stood with her sister Marisol, both of them pretending not to know the hooded figure on the platform. But Sonara could feel his satisfaction radiating across the hall, his hatred. Tonight was supposed to be his final victory. No one would claim a woman whose face they couldn't see. And when the auction ended with no offers, Aldrich would be within his legal rights to sell his unwanted daughter into proper slavery. He'd made that very clear this morning, his voice cold with decades of contempt. "You should have died instead of your mother," he'd told her. "But since you insist on breathing, I'll make certain every breath is a punishment." The crowd's whispers pulled her back to the present. "Look at that one," a merchant muttered, "hiding like she's got plague beneath that hood." "Perhaps she does," his companion laughed. "Perhaps that's why she's here instead of a proper mating ceremony." Sonara's fingers tightened in her sleeves. They didn't know the half of it. The scar on her face wasn't disease or battle wound. It was a brand, burned into her flesh by her own father's hand. The mark of a bound witch, her magic sealed away, her crimes supposedly written on her skin for all to see. Crimes she hadn't committed. But no one had believed her then. No one would believe her now. The auctioneer moved down the line, and Sonara braced herself. Soon it would be her turn. Soon the whole hall would see what she'd hidden, and the disgust would come, and her father would finally have his revenge. The great doors crashed open. Every head turned. Every whisper died. And something immense and ancient rolled through the hall like a physical force, pressing against Sonara's chest until she could barely breathe. Alpha presence. But not ordinary dominance. This was power so pure, so undiluted, it felt like standing in the path of an avalanche. "The Alpha King!" someone gasped. "Gods above! What is he doing here?" Sonara's breath caught. Alpha King Calder of Valdorn walked into the hall as if he owned every soul within it, which, she supposed, he did. He was tall, taller than any man present, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes the color of a frozen lake, pale gray and utterly merciless. He moved with the predatory grace of a wolf who had never known a challenger worth his attention. Beautiful, the rumors said. So beautiful that noble women composed sonnets in his honor, that princesses from distant kingdoms invented excuses to visit his court. But beautiful was too soft a word. This was beauty that could wound you before you even realized you were bleeding. "Continue," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. The auctioneer stammered. "Your Majesty, we are deeply honored by your presence, but surely you haven't come to—" I said continue. The king began walking toward the platform. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow, and Sonara watched him approach with growing terror. He passed the weeping woman without a glance, past the scarred warrior, past every woman on the platform until he stood directly in front of her. Sonara kept her head bowed, staring at the stone beneath her hood. "Please," she thought desperately. "Please, just move on. Please don't look. Please don't." Cold fingers closed around the edge of her hood. "No," she breathed. "Please don't." He pulled the fabric back. The crowd's gasp hit her like a physical blow. She felt their eyes on her scar, on the raised and twisted flesh that covered half her forehead, the brand that marked her as dangerous, criminal, and bound. She heard the whispers surge like wildfire. "Gods, look at her face! Is that a binding mark? She's a witch. She must have done something terrible to be marked like that." Sonara couldn't breathe. Her father was smiling. She knew it without looking. This was even better than slavery. Public humiliation. The king himself bearing witness to her shame. But when she finally dared to look up, she found Calder studying her with an expression she couldn't read. His pale eyes traced the scar, followed its path across her skin, and lingered on the symbol burned into its center. His face revealed nothing. Not disgust, not pity, not even curiosity. Nothing at all. The silence stretched until Sonara thought she might shatter. Then the Alpha King spoke. "I'll take this one." Chaos erupted. The carriage rattled through the darkening streets toward the castle, and Sonara sat frozen on the velvet seat, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "He saw me," she thought. "He saw my face, my scar, my brand. He knows what I am, and he chose me anyway." It made no sense. The Alpha King could have anyone. Empresses had begged for his hand. Princesses had offered fortunes for a single night in his bed. And he'd walked into a market for the desperate and unwanted, looked directly at her ruined face, and claimed her. Why? Through the small window she watched the castle grow larger against the pale sky, spires of black stone piercing the clouds, windows glowing with cold light. It looked less like a home than a fortress designed to keep the world at bay. Perhaps that was fitting. The carriage stopped. A guard opened the door and offered his hand, and Sonara took it with trembling fingers. The courtyard was empty, except for servants who bowed as she passed, their expressions carefully blank. No one sneered at her scar. No one whispered. The silence was somehow worse than mockery. She was led through endless corridors, past tapestries and armor and doors that seemed to watch her pass, until finally a guard stopped before a heavy wooden entrance. "The king will see you now, my lady." My lady. When had anyone called her that? Sonara stepped inside. The room was a study, lined with books and maps, dominated by a massive desk covered in documents. A fire burned low in the hearth, but the room still felt cold. And standing by the window, backlit by gray evening light, was the Alpha King. He didn't turn when she entered. Sonara curtsied, her legs unsteady. "Your Majesty." "Close the door." She obeyed. The click of the latch sounded terribly final. For a long moment neither spoke. Sonara could see only his silhouette against the window, the broad shoulders, the dark hair, the perfect stillness of a predator who had never needed to rush. "You're wondering why I chose you," he said finally. Sonara's throat tightened. "Yes, Your Majesty. You're wondering if I'm mad, or cruel, or playing some game you don't yet understand." The thought had occurred to me. He turned then, and she saw his face fully for the first time since the auction. In the firelight, his features were sharp as cut glass, beautiful and cold and utterly unreadable. "I chose you," he said, "because I need a queen who will ask nothing of me." Sonara blinked. "I don't understand." Calder moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Even from across the room, she could feel the cold radiating from him, unnatural for a shifter. Alphas ran hot. Everyone knew that. But the king felt like frost made flesh. "The wedding will take place in 3 days," he continued. "You will become my queen. You will have titles, wealth, and protection. Anything you desire will be provided." Sonara's pulse quickened. "And in return?" "You will give me heirs to secure the succession. Other than that—" He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the frost in his pale eyes. "We will share nothing. Not meals, not chambers, not conversation beyond what is strictly necessary. You will appear beside me at official functions, perhaps 4 times a year. That is all." The words should have been a blow. Instead, Sonara felt something strange unfurling in her chest. "He's offering me nothing," she realized. No affection, no companionship, no warmth. And yet it was more than she'd ever dared hope for. "You saw my brand," she said quietly. "You know what it means. I know what others believe it means." "And you still want to marry me?" Calder's expression didn't change. "I require a queen who will make no demands, who will expect nothing from me and therefore cannot be disappointed. You have spent your life being unwanted." His eyes traced her scar. "I suspect you've learned not to expect kindness. That makes you ideal." It was brutal in its honesty. And somehow, impossibly, it was also the most respectful thing anyone had said to her in years. Cold over cruelty, Sonara thought, remembering her mother's words. "I'll choose cold over cruelty every time." "There's one more condition," Calder said. His voice dropped, and something flickered behind his frozen expression, something almost like pain. "I will never love you, Sonara. Whatever else happens, whatever arrangement we come to find comfortable, that is the one promise I will keep. I cannot love you. I will not. Is that understood?" Sonara met his gaze through the dim light. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said. "It's understood." She should have asked why, should have demanded an explanation for this strange, cold offer. But she was too tired, too relieved, too desperate to escape the alternative. "Then we have an agreement." Calder turned back toward the window. "Servants will show you to your chambers. We'll finalize the contract tomorrow." Sonara curtsied again and moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her before she could leave. "Sonara." She turned. "Yes, Your Majesty." He was still facing the window, his silhouette rigid against the fading light. Your brand marks you as a fire witch. Bound, yes, but fire nonetheless. Her blood ran cold. Your Majesty, I'm not accusing you of anything. His voice was flat, emotionless. I'm merely observing that fire is a curious element for a woman who has spent her life trying to disappear. He said nothing more. Sonara fled the room with his words echoing in her skull. He knows what I am. He knows. And he chose me anyway. But the question that haunted her as servants led her to chambers larger than any she'd ever occupied was the one she hadn't dared to ask. What was he hiding? The contract signing took place the following morning in the King's Council chamber. Sonara had barely slept. The chambers they'd given her were impossibly luxurious, with silk sheets and a canopied bed, and servants who attended her every need. But luxury couldn't quiet her racing thoughts. She kept replaying the king's words, his cold offer, his strange observation about fire, and the way he'd looked at her scar, not with disgust, but with something she couldn't name. Now, walking through the castle corridors with a guard as escort, Sonara tried to steady her breathing. Her father would be at this meeting. She could already feel his presence like a weight pressing against her chest. Lady Sonara, the guard announced as she stepped through the door. The council chamber was vast. A long table dominated the space, with windows behind it letting in pale morning light. Advisors lined the walls, their faces carefully neutral. At the head of the table sat the Alpha King, dressed in black, his expression carved from stone. And at the far end, barely looking at her, sat her father. Lord Aldrich Vance had the same dark hair as Sonara, the same sharp cheekbones. But where her eyes held shadows of pain and survival, his held only contempt. He didn't acknowledge her entrance, didn't even glance in her direction. Beside him sat Marisol. Sonara's sister had always been the beautiful one, golden-haired where Sonara was dark, unmarked where Sonara was scarred, beloved where Sonara was despised. Even now, dressed in a gown of pale green, Marisol looked like everything Sonara could never be. Their eyes met for just a moment before Marisol looked away. "Please sit," Calder said, gesturing to a chair near him. Sonara obeyed. Her hands trembled beneath the table, but she kept her face calm. Years of practice had taught her to hide her fear. One of the advisors cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, the marriage contract has been prepared according to your specifications. Shall I summarize the terms?" "I'll summarize them myself." Calder picked up the document and scanned it briefly before setting it aside. His pale eyes found Sonara. "The terms are straightforward. You will be my queen in title and law. You will receive all the rights and privileges of that station, including protection under my name, access to royal funds, and authority over household matters." Sonara nodded slowly. So far, nothing unexpected. "In return," Calder continued, "you will provide heirs to secure the succession. Beyond that, our lives will remain separate. We will not share meals unless protocol demands it. We will not share chambers beyond what is necessary for conception. You will make no demands on my time or attention." Her father leaned forward. "Your Majesty, if I may, you may not." The words cracked through the room like ice breaking. Aldrich's face went red, but he sat back immediately, his jaw clenched. Calder's gaze never left Sonara. "Is this arrangement acceptable to you?" Before she could answer, her father spoke again, his voice dripping with false concern. "Your Majesty, I feel it's my duty to warn you about my daughter's nature. The brand on her face isn't merely cosmetic. She's dangerous, unstable. If you knew what she'd done—" "I wasn't addressing you." Calder's voice dropped to something soft and terrifying. "I was addressing my future queen." Sonara's breath caught. My future queen. The words hung in the air like a shield between her and her father's hatred. She'd never had anyone defend her. Never had anyone stepped between her and Aldrich's cruelty. "Is this arrangement acceptable?" Calder repeated. "Yes, Your Majesty." Sonara's voice came out stronger than she'd expected. "More than acceptable. You honor me greatly." For just a moment, confusion flickered across the king's frozen features. "Honor you?" "Yes." She held his gaze, though it terrified her. "You saw my scar and didn't recoil. You learned of my brand and didn't condemn me. You're offering me protection and safety despite knowing what the world believes I am." Her voice steadied. "That is more kindness than I've received in a very long time, Your Majesty." Silence fell over the chamber. The advisors shifted uncomfortably. Her father's hands clenched on the table, his fury barely contained. And Calder looked at her with something that might have been wonder. "Kindness," he repeated slowly, as if tasting a foreign word. "Yes." He studied her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slightly and returned his attention to the contract. "Sign here." Sonara signed. Her father signed as witness, his pen scratching across the paper with barely contained rage. The advisors signed. And then it was done. She was going to be queen. Exiting the chamber felt like walking through fire. The corridors were full of courtiers who'd gathered to catch a glimpse of the mysterious woman the king had claimed. Whispers followed her like smoke. "Look at that scar. What could she have possibly done? I heard she murdered someone, burned them alive. And he's marrying her anyway? Has the king gone mad?" Sonara kept walking, her head high and her chest tight. Just a few more steps to the staircase, a few more steps to the safety of her chambers. Someone stepped into her path. Marisol. Her sister's eyes were red, as if she'd been crying, or trying not to. "We need to talk." Sonara wanted to refuse, wanted to walk past and never look back. But something in Marisol's expression stopped her. A desperation that seemed almost genuine. "Fine," Sonara said quietly. "Speak." They moved into an alcove off the main corridor, away from prying eyes and ears. "You should refuse him," Marisol whispered. Sonara almost laughed. "And why would I do that? So father can sell me into slavery instead?" "Because you don't understand what you're getting into." Marisol's voice rose despite herself. "The Alpha King isn't what he seems. There are rumors, Sonara. Terrible rumors about his bloodline, about why he's never taken a mate before, about what happens to the women who get too close to him." "What kind of rumors?" Marisol hesitated. "They say something is wrong with him, something ancient and cursed. They say his grandfather died screaming, and his father died frozen in his own bed, and that Calder himself is what? Dying." Marisol's eyes were wide. "They say he's dying, and that's why he chose someone from the auction, someone disposable, someone no one would miss." The words hit Sonara like a fist to the chest. Disposable. Someone no one would miss. She wanted to deny it. Wanted to believe there was another explanation for the king's strange offer, his cold demeanor, and his insistence that he would never love her. But deep down, a terrible suspicion began to form. "Why are you telling me this?" Sonara asked. "You've hated me for years. You blamed me for Corwin's death, even though you know I couldn't have—" "I know what I said." Marisol's voice cracked. "And I know what father told us to believe, but that doesn't mean I want you dead." She gripped Sonara's arm with trembling fingers. "Get out while you can. Refuse the contract. Run if you have to. Because whatever the king is hiding, whatever curse is eating him alive." She leaned closer, her whisper barely audible. "He'll destroy you with him, Sonara. He'll destroy you, and no one will care enough to save you." Then she was gone, disappearing down the corridor in a rustle of green silk. Sonara stood alone in the alcove, her sister's warning echoing in her skull. "He's dying. Disposable. He'll destroy you." She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to disappear into the wilderness, to take her chances with slavery rather than chain herself to a cursed king. But as she climbed the stairs toward her chambers, Sonara realized something that stopped her cold. For the first time in years, she didn't want to run. She wanted to know what the king was hiding. The wedding took place 3 days later in the great cathedral of Valdorn. Sonara had spent those days in a haze of preparation. Seamstresses measured her for gowns. Servants styled her hair in elaborate braids. Ladies-in-waiting she'd never met taught her the proper way to curtsy before visiting dignitaries. No one mentioned her scar. It was as if the king had issued an invisible decree. Look at her face all you want, but say nothing. And so they didn't. They averted their eyes when she passed. They spoke around it, over it, through it, but never about it. Sonara didn't know whether to feel grateful or unsettled. Now, sitting in a gilded carriage as it wound through streets packed with onlookers, she felt only terror. The crowd pressed against the barriers, straining for a glimpse of their new queen. Their whispers filtered through the carriage walls. I heard she's hideous. They say she's cursed, branded like a criminal. Why would the king choose someone like that? Sonara pressed her hands together to stop them from shaking. She wore no hood today. Calder had been clear about that. A queen didn't hide. Whatever shame she carried, she would carry it in plain sight. The carriage stopped before the cathedral steps. A footman opened the door. Sonara stepped out into the pale afternoon light, and the crowd's noise swelled to a roar before dying into stunned silence. They could see her now. All of them. The scar that twisted across her forehead, the brand burned into its center, the evidence of crimes she'd never committed. She lifted her chin and walked toward the cathedral doors. Inside, the pews were packed with nobility. Silks and jewels glittered in the candlelight. Every face turned toward her, and Sonara felt their stares like needles against her skin. But she kept walking, because at the far end of the aisle, standing before the altar in a coat of black velvet, was Calder. He watched her approach with those frozen eyes, his expression revealing nothing. Even from this distance she could feel the cold radiating from him. It seemed to intensify the closer she got, as if winter lived beneath his skin. The priest began the ceremony. Sonara barely heard the words. She was too aware of Calder beside her, too conscious of the way the candlelight played across his sharp features. He was beautiful in a way that made her ache. Dangerous, mesmerizing, capable of stealing your breath without warning. Do you, Calder, Alpha King of Valdorn, take this woman as your wife, your queen, your mate? I do. His voice was steady, emotionless, as if he were agreeing to a trade negotiation rather than a lifelong bond. And do you, Sonara Vance, take this man as your husband, your king, your mate? I do. The priest smiled. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you. Wait. Calder's voice cut through the ceremony. The priest stammered into silence. The crowd held its breath. Sonara's stomach dropped. He's changed his mind, she thought. He's going to reject me in front of everyone. But Calder didn't look angry. He looked uncertain, as if he were wrestling with something he couldn't name. There's something you should know, he said quietly, pitching his voice so only she could hear. Before we complete this bond. What is it? His jaw tightened. I told you I would never love you. That wasn't cruelty, Sonara. It was warning. Warning of what? For just a moment, something flickered behind his frozen expression. Pain. Ancient and terrible and barely contained. There are things about my bloodline that I cannot explain. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. His eyes held hers. But I need you to understand that my distance isn't punishment. It's protection. Protection. From what? Before she could ask, he turned back to the priest. Continue. The ceremony concluded in a blur. Rings were exchanged. Vows were spoken. And when the priest announced that Calder could kiss his bride, the cathedral fell silent. Everyone waited to see what would happen. Sonara felt the weight of 1,000 stares, felt her father's hatred burning from the pews, felt Marisol's fear and confusion. Calder stepped closer. His hand rose to her face and Sonara flinched, expecting, she didn't know what. Mockery, disgust, some final humiliation. Instead, his cold fingers traced the edge of her scar with impossible gentleness. "Does it hurt?" he asked softly. "Not anymore." Liar. The word was barely a whisper, but there was no cruelty in it, only understanding. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. Not to her mouth, to the scar itself. The brand that marked her as criminal, as dangerous, as bound. He kissed her shame as if it were something precious. The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. This wasn't how royal weddings were supposed to go. The king was supposed to claim his bride properly, publicly, with passion and possession. But Sonara stood frozen, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. He kissed my scar, she thought, in front of everyone, as if it were nothing to be ashamed of. That night, Sonara waited in the royal bedchamber. The room was vast, dominated by a canopied bed draped in dark silk. Candles flickered on every surface, casting dancing shadows across the walls. A fire burned in the hearth, but the room still felt cold. She'd been bathed and perfumed and dressed in a nightgown so thin it might as well have been mist. The servants had left her alone hours ago, and now she sat on the edge of the bed, trying to control her breathing. This was the consummation, the duty she'd agreed to. Heirs for the kingdom. She'd prepared herself for coldness, for efficiency, for a transaction completed in darkness and silence. She hadn't prepared for the knock at the door. "Come in," she managed. Calder entered. He'd changed from his wedding clothes into a simple white shirt, unlaced at the throat. His dark hair was loose around his shoulders. In the candlelight, he looked less like a king and more like a man. A beautiful, dangerous, exhausted man. He closed the door behind him. "You're nervous," he observed. "Yes. You don't need to be." He moved toward her slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. "I won't hurt you, Sonara. Whatever else happens between us, I swear that." She believed him. That was the strangest part. Despite everything, despite the warnings and rumors and her sister's terrified whispers, she believed him. "Your hands," she said suddenly. "They're cold." He paused. "Yes. Alphas run hot, everyone knows that. Most alphas, yes. But not you." Something shifted in his expression, a wall going up, a door closing. "There are things about me that I cannot explain," he said again. "Not yet." "Then don't explain." Sonara rose from the bed and crossed to where he stood. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the shadows beneath his eyes. "Just tell me what you need." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Warmth." The word hung between them. Sonara understood. She didn't know how or why, but she understood. This cold that lived inside him wasn't natural. It was consuming him. And whatever curse or burden he carried, it had left him starving for something he couldn't name. She took his hand. His fingers were like ice against her palm. But she didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, she pressed his hand against her chest, just above her heart, where her warmth was strongest. "Then take what you need," she whispered. Calder's eyes widened, and then he kissed her. Not gently this time, not carefully. He kissed her like a drowning man gasping for air, his cold lips warming against hers, his hands pulling her closer as if he couldn't bear any distance between them. Sonara kissed him back. The rest of the night was a blur of sensation, his cold skin against her warmth, his breath ragged in the darkness. the way he whispered her name like a prayer he'd forgotten he knew. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the silk sheets. His arm was draped across her waist, his forehead pressed against her shoulder. She could feel him shivering, even now. "Stay," she whispered. "Don't leave yet." He tensed beside her. For a moment she thought he would refuse, would pull away, dress in the darkness, and disappear into the cold corridors of his castle. Instead, he pulled her closer. "Just for tonight," he murmured against her hair. "Just this once." He was gone by morning, but his scent lingered on the pillows, and Sonara lay in the empty bed, touching the place where he'd slept. She wanted more. Gods help her, she wanted so much more. The king returned that night. Sonara hadn't expected it. He'd been clear about their arrangement. Separate lives, minimal contact, a transaction, not a marriage. But when the sun set and the castle grew quiet, there was a knock at her chamber door. And when she opened it, Calder stood in the corridor, his expression unreadable. "May I come in?" She stepped aside without a word. They didn't speak much that second night, or the third, or the fourth. He arrived after dark, and they fell into each other with a desperation that surprised them both. His cold skin warming against her heat, her fire meeting his ice. Afterward, he would hold her, just for a few minutes, just long enough for the shivering to stop. Then he would dress and leave, and Sonara would lie awake, counting the hours until he returned. On the fifth night, he stayed longer. "You're still cold?" Sonara said, tracing her fingers along his arm. Even after everything, his skin felt like winter. "Always cold. It never changes." "No." His voice was rough. "It never does." "Is that part of what you can't explain?" Silence. Then, "Yes." She turned to face him in the darkness. "Will you ever tell me?" "Perhaps." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "When I understand it myself." It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't a rejection either. And somehow, that felt like progress. The weeks that followed changed everything. Calder still maintained their separate lives during the day. He attended to his kingdom. She learned the duties of a queen. They passed each other in corridors and exchanged polite nods like strangers. But at night, they were anything but strangers. He began arriving earlier, sometimes before dinner, joining her for a meal in her chambers before leading her to bed. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing, his burdens as king, her memories of a childhood before her mother died, the way the moonlight looked through her window. She learned that he loved old books and hated formal dinners, that he could recite poetry from memory but claimed to have no artistic soul. That he laughed rarely, but when he did, the sound transformed his whole face. She also learned about the cold. It wasn't constant, she discovered. Some nights he was merely cool to the touch. Others, he was so frozen she feared he might shatter. On those nights, she built the fire higher, wrapped herself around him, and gave him every ounce of warmth she possessed. He never explained. But his gratitude was evident in the way he held her afterward, like she was the only solid thing in a world made of ice. "You should hate me," he said one night, his voice muffled against her hair. "Why?" "Because I'm using you, your warmth, your fire." His arms tightened around her. "I told myself I chose you because you wouldn't ask questions, because you'd accept the arrangement without demanding more." A pause. "I was lying to myself." Sonara's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "I felt you the moment you walked into that auction hall. Your fire. Even bound, even sealed away, it called to me." His cold fingers traced patterns on her back. "I told myself I needed a queen, but what I needed was you." She didn't know what to say, so she kissed him instead. A month later, Sonara realized the truth. She was sitting in her chambers, reading a book she couldn't focus on, when the door opened and Calder walked in. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, skin paler than usual. The cold was worse today. She could feel it from across the room. "What happened?" she asked, rising from her chair. "Trade negotiations." He collapsed onto the settee. "The Southern Kingdoms are refusing to renew our agreements because we can't provide magical goods like we used to." "Why not?" "Because practitioners are banned from most forms of magic." Frustration bled through his controlled voice. "My grandfather's decree. My father upheld it. And now, I'm left with the consequences." Sonara moved to sit beside him. "Do you agree with the ban?" "I don't know." He rubbed his temples. "I was raised to believe magic was dangerous, that witches needed to be controlled. But I've seen what happens when we suppress power instead of guiding it." His eyes found hers, and something passed between them. An understanding. A shared secret neither had named. "If you could change the law," Sonara said carefully, "would you?" "Perhaps." His hand found hers. "If I had someone who could show me another way." They talked until dawn, about magic and politics and the weight of inherited prejudice, about her mother, who had defended Sonara's right to practice magic before her father had silenced them both, about the old ways, the academies that had trained young witches before the bans, the possibility of rebuilding. By the time the sun rose, Sonara had realized two things. First, the king valued her opinion, sought it out, treated her as an equal in ways she'd never experienced. Second, and far more terrifying, she was falling in love with him, not just attracted, not just grateful. Genuinely, deeply, hopelessly in love with a man who had sworn he could never love her back. It was the most dangerous thing she'd ever done. 2 months later, Sonara confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks. She was pregnant. The healer examined her gently, her weathered hands pressing against Sonara's stomach, her expression revealing nothing. Then she sat back and smiled. "Congratulations, Your Majesty. The king will have his heir." Sonara should have felt relieved. This was the purpose of their arrangement. The contract she'd signed, heirs in exchange for protection. Instead, she felt only dread. "He has what he needs now," she thought. "He'll stop coming. Our nights together, our conversations, our whatever we've built. It's over." She waited until evening to tell him. Calder arrived at his usual time, later than he once had. The cold had been worse this week. Some mornings, she found frost on her windows even though summer bloomed outside. Some nights he shivered so badly she feared his bones might crack. But he still came. He always came. "Shh, Sonara." He crossed to where she sat by the fire and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You look troubled." "I have news." Something flickered in his expression. Fear? Hope? She couldn't tell. "Tell me." "I'm pregnant." Silence. Calder went utterly still. His eyes dropped to her stomach, then rose to her face. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then a smile broke across his features. Not a small smile, not a controlled smile. A real smile, radiant and joyful and so unexpected that Sonara felt her breath catch. "We're having a child," he said. "Yes?" "A child." He sank to his knees before her, his hands finding her stomach with trembling reverence. "Our child." "Calder." She didn't know how to say it, how to voice the fear that had been eating at her for weeks. "I understand if you don't need to visit anymore. The contract only required heirs, and now—" "Stop." His voice was sharp. His eyes, when they met hers, were fierce with something she'd never seen before. "Do you think I've been coming here for the contract?" He rose, pulling her to her feet, his cold hands cupping her face. "Do you think any of this has been about duty? You said you would never love me." Her voice broke. "You said our lives would remain separate." "I was a fool." His forehead pressed against hers. I was so afraid of what might happen that I convinced myself I could keep you at a distance. But you burned through every wall I built, Sonara. Every single one. Her pulse raced so fast she could barely breathe. What are you saying? I'm saying... He pulled back just enough to look at her. His pale eyes were bright, vulnerable, terrified. I'm saying that I love you. Joy exploded through her chest. Calder. I love you. He kissed her forehead. I love you. Her cheeks. I love... He stopped mid-word. His eyes went wide. His hands flew to his chest and a strangled sound escaped his throat. Calder. Sonara grabbed his arms. What's wrong? What's happening? He couldn't answer. His whole body convulsed, and she watched in horror as frost began spreading across his skin. Not on the outside. Under it. Crystallizing beneath his flesh, turning his veins to silver threads of ice. No. He gasped the word. No. Not yet. I wasn't supposed to. He collapsed. Sonara screamed. She caught him before he hit the floor, cradling his frozen body against her warmth. His eyes were open but unfocused. His skin was so cold it burned. Help! She screamed. Someone help us! Guards burst through the door. Servants flooded the chamber. But Sonara barely noticed. She was staring at her husband's face, at the frost crawling across his cheeks, at the blue tinge spreading to his lips. What's happening to him? She demanded. Someone tell me what's happening. An old servant knelt beside her, his face grim. The curse, Your Majesty. The curse of his bloodline. What curse? What are you talking about? The servant's eyes were full of sorrow. The kings of Valdorn cannot love. If they do... He gestured to Calder's frozen form. Their hearts turn to ice. They die. The world tilted. His words echoed in her mind. All his warnings. His insistence that he could never love her. His terror that she might get too close. He'd known. He'd known this would happen. And he'd loved her anyway. No, Sonara whispered, pulling his cold body closer. No, 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 you can't die. Not now. Not because of me. But Calder didn't respond. The frost continued to spread. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the seal that bound her magic, Sonara felt her fire begin to wake. 3 days passed. 3 days of Sonara refusing to leave Calder's side. 3 days of watching the frost spread beneath his skin, turning his veins to silver threads of ice. 3 days of pressing her body against his, trying to share whatever warmth she had left. It wasn't enough. The healers came and went. They examined him with trembling hands and left with shaking heads. No medicine could help him. No poultice or potion or prayer. It's the curse, they whispered. Nothing can be done. But Sonara refused to accept that. On the 3rd night, when the castle had grown quiet and the servants had retreated to give her privacy, she did the only thing she could think of. She told him the truth. Calder. She gripped his frozen hand, pressing it against her cheek. I know you can hear me. I need you to listen. His eyes were closed. His breathing was shallow. But she felt a faint pulse beneath her fingers, and that was enough. You love me, she whispered. That's why this is happening. Your heart is freezing because you let yourself feel something for me. Tears streamed down her face. So I'm going to give you a reason to stop. She reached up and traced the scar on her forehead. The brand that had defined her entire life. The mark of a bound witch. A criminal. A monster. You know what this is. But you don't know how I got it. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. On the morning of my 16th birthday, my father came to my room. He said my magic was too dangerous, too wild, that I needed to be bound for everyone's safety. He pressed the brand to my forehead himself while 2 servants held me down. She closed her eyes, remembering the agony, the smell of her own flesh burning, That same night, hours after I was sealed, a nobleman named Corwin died. He'd been engaged to me, but he'd fallen for Marisol instead. They were planning to run away together. A bitter laugh escaped her. The fire that killed him was so precise, so targeted, that nothing else was touched. Just him. Just the man who'd chosen my sister over me. She opened her eyes and stared at Calder's frozen face. Everyone believed I killed him in a fit of jealous rage. My father told them I must have broken free of the seal somehow, that my magic was too dangerous to control. He had me branded again, deeper this time, and told the world I was a murderer. She pressed her lips to his cold knuckles. So hate me, Calder. Look at what I am, what the world believes I did, and let your love die. Let your heart thaw. Let yourself live. Silence. Then, impossibly, his fingers twitched in her grip. His eyes opened. Just barely. Just enough to find her face. Sonara. Her name came out as a ragged whisper. Calder. She leaned closer. You heard me? You understand? I might be a murderer. I might have killed an innocent man because I couldn't control my own rage. You have to. You didn't kill him. The words stopped her cold. What? The timeline. His voice was fading, his eyes struggling to stay open. You said your father branded you that morning, sealed your magic before the fire. Yes, but then you couldn't have started that fire. His frozen hand squeezed hers with the last of his strength. The seal takes effect immediately. If you were bound before Corwin died, your magic was already locked away. It's impossible for you to have killed him. Understanding crashed through her like a wave. Someone else did, she breathed. Someone with fire magic. Someone who wanted me blamed. Someone who gained something from Corwin's death. Calder's eyes closed again. Someone who wanted to be rid of you both. His words faded into silence. The frost continued to spread. But Sonara's mind was racing. If she hadn't killed Corwin, then who had? Who else had fire magic? Who would have wanted to frame her? The answer came to her with sickening clarity. Her father. I need a witch. Sonara stood before the council, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Calder had been unconscious for 4 days now. The frost had spread to cover his entire torso. His lips were blue. His skin was translucent. He was running out of time. Your Majesty, the eldest counselor said carefully, witches are restricted by law. Only minor healing magic is permitted within the kingdom. Then find one outside the kingdom. Find one powerful enough to break a curse that's lasted generations. The counselors exchanged uncomfortable glances. There is one, another admitted reluctantly. A storm witch in the eastern mountains. She's said to be powerful enough to challenge the old curses, but Your Majesty, the journey alone would take. Send for her immediately. I don't care what it costs. The witch arrived 2 days later. Her name was Thessaly, and she was ancient, with silver hair that crackled with static and eyes the color of thunderclouds. She examined Calder thoroughly while Sonara hovered nearby, her hands pressed against her stomach where their child grew. Ice magic, Thessaly said finally, a curse rooted in the bloodline itself. Very old, very powerful. Can you break it? The witch shook her head slowly. Not alone. Ice requires its opposite to counter. Fire, pure and strong and wielded by someone connected to the cursed. Fire magic. Sonara's heart clenched. I have fire magic, but it's bound, sealed away. Thessaly's eyes sharpened. She moved closer, studying Sonara's face, the brand on her forehead. This seal, she murmured. Who placed it? My father. Aldrich Vance? Sonara blinked. You know him? I know his bloodline. Thessaly's expression darkened. I knew his mother. Rowena Vance was a fire witch of extraordinary power. When she manifested, her family was horrified. They said she died of illness, but I knew the truth. Her husband discovered what she was. and had her executed in secret. The world tilted beneath Sonara's feet. His mother was a witch? One of the strongest I ever knew? Thessaly's voice was heavy with old grief. Sonara's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Her grandmother had been a witch, which meant the magic hadn't come from some affair, some shameful secret her father needed to hide. It had come from him. My mother, she whispered. He blamed my mother, said she must have betrayed him, that my magic proved her unfaithful, but she was innocent. It would seem so. And my father knew. Rage began to build in Sonara's chest. He knew the magic came from his own bloodline. He let my mother be banished. He branded me. He let me believe I was a monster. Thessaly watched her with ancient eyes. The seal can only be broken by the one who placed it, or by destroying the physical object that holds the binding. What object? It varies. A stone, a pendant, something small enough to keep hidden but significant enough to anchor the magic. Sonara thought of her father, his study, the locked drawer he never let anyone open. I know where it is, she said. She rose to her feet, her hands trembling with fury and determination. Watch over my husband, she told Thessaly. Keep him alive as long as you can. Where are you going? Sonara's eyes were hard as flint. To get answers. The Vance estate loomed against the darkening sky like a monument to cruelty. Sonara had ridden through the afternoon, pushing her horse until both of them were exhausted. Two of Calder's personal guards flanked her, their expressions grim. They'd tried to convince her to wait, to send soldiers instead. She'd refused. This was her fight. Her truth to claim. A servant met her at the door, his face pale with shock. Lady Sonara, I mean your majesty. Lord Vance is not receiving visitors. He'll receive his queen. She pushed past him into the main hall. Her father stood by the fireplace, a glass of wine in his hand. When he saw her, his face twisted with familiar contempt. But there was something else beneath it now. Something that looked almost like fear. Marisol rose from a chair in the corner, her eyes wide. You! Aldrich's voice dripped with disgust. How dare you show your face in this house? I want the seal, Sonara said. Silence. Her father's hand tightened on his glass. I don't know what you're talking about. The object you used to bind my magic, I know you have it. I know you've kept it locked away all these years. She stepped closer. Give it to me. Why? Aldrich sneered. So you can unleash your fire on the world again? Kill more innocent men? I didn't kill Corwin. Liar. My magic was already bound when he died. Sonara's voice was steady. You sealed me that morning, hours before the fire. The timing doesn't work. If I was bound before Corwin died, I couldn't have started that fire. Something flickered in her father's eyes. You're grasping at straws, he said. Desperate lies to save yourself. Am I? Sonara took another step forward. Thessaly the Storm Witch told me something interesting today. She knew your mother. Rowena Vance, the fire witch who died of illness when you were a boy. Aldrich went pale. The magic didn't come from Mother's affair, Sonara continued. There was no affair. The magic came from your bloodline. From you. That's impossible. Is it? She was close enough now to see the sweat beading on his forehead. You have fire magic too, don't you, Father? You've hidden it your whole life, terrified someone would discover the truth. And when I manifested, when your secret threatened to come out, stop. You blamed Mother, banished her, let her die in exile. Sonara's voice rose. And when that wasn't enough, when Corwin threatened to take Marisol away and leave you with only me as your heir, I said stop. You killed him yourself. The words echoed through the hall. Marisol gasped. Father? Is this true? Aldrich's face contorted with rage. That commoner wasn't worthy of you. He would have dragged our name through the mud. I did what was necessary to protect this family. By murdering him. Marisol's voice cracked. By framing Sonara? By letting me believe my own sister was a killer? She was convenient. Aldrich's mask finally cracked, revealing the monster beneath. A reminder of my shame. Every time I looked at her face, I saw my mother's weakness, my own tainted blood. He turned to Sonara with burning hatred. I should have drowned you at birth. Instead, I found a better use for you. A scapegoat. A vessel for every sin I needed to bury. Sonara felt nothing. No hurt, no surprise. Just cold, crystalline clarity. The seal, she said. Where is it? You think I'll just give it to you? Aldrich laughed. Your precious king is dying. I heard the rumors. The curse took him, didn't it? The same curse that's killed every Valdorn king who was fool enough to love. He smiled, a terrible, triumphant smile. Let him die. Let the whole bloodline end. And when the kingdom falls into chaos, I'll be there to pick up the pieces. Sonara didn't see Marisol move. One moment her sister was standing frozen by the window. The next, her fist connected with their father's face with a sickening crack. Aldrich stumbled backward, blood streaming from his nose. His head struck the edge of the mantel as he fell, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Silence filled the hall. Marisol stood over him, her chest heaving, her knuckles split and bleeding. When she looked at Sonara, her eyes were full of tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. For believing him. For hating you. For... Later. Sonara crossed to her sister and gripped her shoulders. The seal. Do you know where he keeps it? Marisol nodded shakily. His study. There's a locked box in the bottom drawer of his desk. Get it for me. Marisol ran from the room. Sonara stood over her father's prone form, waiting for anger. Waiting for satisfaction. Waiting for something. She felt only emptiness. He destroyed my life, she thought. Killed my mother. Murdered Corwin. Branded me. Sold me to an auction. And for what? To hide a truth that was never shameful to begin with. Marisol returned breathless, pressing a small wooden box into Sonara's hands. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a blood-red stone that pulsed with contained fire. Her fire. I'll have him arrested, Marisol said. I'll testify to everything. Murder, conspiracy, false imprisonment. Sonara met her sister's eyes. For years she'd dreamed of this moment. Of Marisol finally seeing the truth. Of the sister who'd hated her offering something other than contempt. Thank you, she said quietly. Then she turned and ran for her horse. There was still time. There had to be. She reached the castle at dawn. Thessaly met her at Calder's chamber door, her ancient face grim. He's fading. The frost has reached his heart. You have hours at best. Sonara pushed past her into the room. Calder lay motionless on the bed, his skin so pale it was almost translucent. The frost beneath his flesh had spread to cover every inch of him. He looked like a statue carved from ice, but she could still see his chest rising. Barely, struggling, he was fighting. Even now he was fighting to stay. Sonara gripped the blood-red stone in her hand. How do I break it? Destroy the vessel, Thessaly said from the doorway. Your fire will do the rest. Sonara set the stone on the floor. She didn't know how to summon magic she hadn't used in over a decade. Didn't know if the power would even answer after being caged for so long. But she thought of Calder. His cold hands warming against her skin, his rare smiles, the way he'd kissed her scar as if it were precious. The way he'd said, I love you, knowing it would kill him. Heat erupted from her palms. The stone exploded into fragments, and power flooded through her veins like a river breaking through a dam. Fire magic, wild and fierce and finally free. Sonara crossed to the bed and pressed her burning hands against Calder's frozen chest. Come back to me, she whispered. Please, Calder, come back. The frost hissed where her fire touched it. Steam rose from his skin. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the ice began to melt, slowly at first, then faster. The silver threads beneath his skin dissolved. The blue tinge faded from his lips. Color returned to his cheeks, and then his eyes opened. Gray eyes, warm now instead of frozen, found her face. Sonara. She collapsed against him, sobbing. His arms came around her, no longer cold, no longer shivering, and held her tight. You saved me, he murmured against her hair. You were dying because you loved me. She pulled back to look at him. I had to. No. He cupped her face in his hands, his warm hands. I was dying because my ancestors made a terrible bargain, but you broke it. Not just for me, for our entire bloodline. She thought of the child growing inside her, their son or daughter, free from the curse that had haunted generations. I love you, she said. He smiled, a real smile, without shadows, without walls. I love you too. 6 months later, Sonara stood in the training courtyard, flames dancing between her fingers. Her magic had returned stronger than ever. Controlled now, shaped by months of practice with Thessaly as her guide. She could summon fire with a thought, direct it with precision, and extinguish it with a breath. She was no longer bound, no longer branded, no longer the monster her father had tried to make her. Mama! She turned to see Marisol approaching with baby Ronan in her arms. Her son squirmed toward her, his tiny hands grasping, his gray eyes bright with joy. Calder's eyes. Their son had his father's eyes. Someone wanted his mother, Marisol said, passing him over. Sonara kissed Ronan's chubby cheek and looked at her sister. Things between them were still healing. Years of hatred couldn't be undone in months. But Marisol had testified at their father's trial, had watched him be stripped of his lands and titles, had visited Sonara every week since Ronan's birth. It was a beginning. The council meeting went well? Sonara asked. Marisol nodded. The new Academy for Young Witches will open next spring. Thessaly agreed to oversee the curriculum. Sonara smiled. Calder's first act after recovering had been to overturn his grandfather's ban on magic. Practitioners were no longer criminals. Children with gifts were no longer branded and bound. The kingdom was healing. Your Majesty. A guard bowed. The king requests your presence in the gardens. Sonara's heart lifted the way it always did when Calder called for her. She found him by the rose bushes, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. When he turned, his face lit up. My queen. He pulled her close, careful not to crush Ronan between them. And my son. Your son is hungry. Sonara laughed. As always. He takes after his father. Calder kissed her forehead, then the scar that crossed it. Both of us are greedy for you. They stood together in the fading light, their son between them, their future stretching ahead like an open road. We were both hiding, Sonara said softly, both pretending we didn't need anyone. Both fools, Calder agreed. And yet, she looked up at him, this man who had lifted her hood and seen her shame and loved her anyway. We found each other. He kissed her then, soft and warm and full of promise. Neither of them had expected love. They'd built walls and sworn vows and convinced themselves they could survive alone. But love had found them anyway, and in loving each other, they'd broken every curse that had ever bound them.